Happy Friday, guitar moderners out there. Sorry I've been missing in action with the interviews. It's been some big changes going on around the guitar modern household. We sold our house. We're leaving Nashville. We're moving to France for now, and we'll see. Looking for a place to settle over there. Thanks to the people who have reached out to me from Guitar Modern when I made the announcement on Facebook and offered to show me around and meet up, and that's great, and I'll be taking you up on that. So I'm going to keep this going. There's no reason it should stop. It might slow down for a while we're traveling, and I need to be looking into places to stay and things like that. But as soon as we're settled, or maybe even before, I'll be posting, just as always, or comme dabs, as they say in, or comme dab, as they say in France. So this interview is with Seth Andrew Davis, and Seth came to my attention in one of the usual ways these days. Believe he sent me an email, and I checked him out, and his music is interesting and experimental, and he's using a laptop and various devices and plugins, and all that makes him interesting to Guitar Modern. But what really interested me, especially in him, was that after some investigation, I discovered that he had done something like 50 gigs since the beginning of January 2022. Now, 50 gigs for a person, a guitar player who plays typical guitar music, would be a lot in that amount of time, and we're just about halfway through the year. But for someone who's playing and composing avant-garde music or very modern music, it was downright astounding. So I had to find out what that was all about. And on top of that, he lives in Kansas City, which I had heard is becoming a hotbed of artists and an artistic bent. But I wanted to talk to him about it and find out exactly what was going on, and how that works, and how he's been working so much, and what he's been doing musically. And so here's my interview with Seth Andrew Davis, and I hope you enjoy it. Scott, by the way, please check out my sponsors, Red Panda and Source Audio. Go to their websites and check out their gear. They make great stuff. Also, thanks to Earthquaker Devices, who have been with me now for 4 years, I think. But they're going to be going to as they release new product model. So you'll be seeing them in the advertising column, but check them out anyway. They're always doing interesting stuff and making great pedals at a very reasonable price. So that said, now let's go to the Seth Andrew Davis interview.
I did, yeah.
I've been impressed by your whole career and work ethic that I've been looking at and following, but now I'm blown away that you obviously married the right woman if she's fine with you doing an interview like 2 days after the wedding.
Yes, we got married on Saturday at her parents' place up north of KC, and then we were cleaning up yesterday because we did a very DIY wedding. We put it together outside and all this stuff. So, and then today she's at work today, so so she went to work, and I'm just getting stuff ready to go. We're gonna leave on Wednesday to go to England and then to Ireland. So
that was my next question. First, congratulations, and
thank you so much.
I was going to ask when's the honeymoon, but is this the honeymoon, or are you going to work?
It's kind of both, because I got into the International Computer Music Conference that's going on July 3rd and 9th through 9th in Limerick, Ireland, at the University of Limerick. This year it's there. It kind of moves around every year. It's at different places. But this year I applied and got in for a piece for electric guitar and electronics called Chomsky Hash, which I kind of been working. It's kind of just like an improvisatory piece that I've been kind of kind of building off of a lot of the things I've worked on the solo album I just put out. But this is a little bit more like planned, thought out, more more thoroughly thought out and planned rather than just simply improvised. Not that like my improvised stuff isn't thought out, but this is more just like I'm going to try to do the same thing every time in a way, or at least have scenes of stuff set up at a different at the same time. But I got into that, and then I was gonna be like, oh, that's cool, I got in, but we can't go. I mean, we already planned to do another thing. And she was like, well, you're gonna go. Like, why would we not go? Like, why? Nora was like, why wouldn't we go? This is like pretty huge, so just let's do it. And I was like, all right, cool. So we decided we were gonna go. So and I'm just like, all right. And we're gonna head over to Ireland, so it's pretty wild. Like I perform next Tuesday, but we leave Wednesday just to go to England for a few days and then hop over.
That's amazing. Well, that's how you know you married the right woman. I mean, I knew I was on the right track when I took my wife to see, for one of our first dates, to see 5 theremin players, and she agreed to another date. So I said maybe we're onto something here. So one reason I was really interested, I mean, I like the record, but one reason I've been, just when you contacted me at one point and I started looking into you, what amazed me is, and what intrigued me is you seem to be the hardest working man in the avant-garde guitar show business world. I mean, looking at your website, you've done something like over 50 gigs this year alone.
I guess I have. I just thought of that.
Yeah, and that would be a feat for somebody who plays some sort of mainstream music or has a major label deal or something. And that's the kind of thing, I mean, before we even get into the music, I am just gobsmacked and really interested in how you developed a career, if that's what we want to call it, where you get to do this as much as you do it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And thank you for talking to me. I'm really excited I'm glad we're doing this. Yeah. I kind of just really got involved in the Kansas City scene. I'm from here originally, like grew up here mostly, and started and went to college here. So I went to UMKC, the University of Missouri, Kansas City. I was in the composition department, and I was, early on, I was like in the improv ensemble, the imp ensemble that was there, and there was a whole bunch of. It was the ensemble that composers took to get their ensemble credit, because you had to be a performer and you had to perform as well as compose in some capacity. And I got in with a lot of my fellow students and professors there, one being Dr. Paul Rudy and Dr. Michael Miller, who developed the course there. And I just started playing with a lot of people, and I was like, oh, there's like people who want to like do this, like play weird improvised music, make weird sounds, and do all this stuff. And interestingly enough, there was a lot of people doing it, and I was kind of exposed to it pretty soon being in school. There was a few groups pretty consistently playing, like around like 2015, 2016, when I was starting at UMKC. There was Nemesis Quartet, which was a group started by Dr. Michael Miller, my former composition teacher. He was a doctorate student there at the time, and in that group, and they were like a woodwind trio with electronics, and they were playing around town a lot, doing like shows, but also like big installation projects. There was the Ensemble of Irreproducible Outcomes, which was like David McIntyre, Ryan Oldham, and Brian Padovic, and they were doing it. And I was an undergrad and getting to know these folks and playing with them. And my friend Michael Eaton, who I started Mother Brain Records with, he was coming back and forth to Kansas City. We got connected, and we talked about, well, let's start playing together and putting stuff together here and there. And we put together like Second Nature Ensemble, which is our like original music with the band, like of thoroughly composed stuff, improvised stuff with electronics elements, electroacoustic elements, and playing around. And then slowly, around the time we were all kind of like doing stuff together, people would come back. We were putting shows on together with a bunch of other people. And then a couple years ago, like my friend Evan Verplu moved to town, and we started Extemporaneous Music and Art Society, which is like a new improvised music collective in town, which with Ben Baker, Chris Copper, Aaron Osborne, and a whole cast of people. So we just kind of like all found each other in some way to start doing stuff and start like playing together a bunch and just putting on shows however we could. Playing wherever with whoever at any time. We've played basement shows, house shows. We play art galleries every once in a while, rock clubs, or wherever. Coffee shops, wherever, just trying to like make it happen from the ground up as much as possible. We all have, I'm a grad student right now, and I'm also I work at I'm a librarian as my day job. Work in the local library system here, so just trying to keep busy with all those elements and trying to play as much as possible. So that's always just been the goal, is just to do as much as possible. And it's really awesome that there's a community here of people, like-minded people who are really into, improvised experimental music, avant-garde music, and just want to do it all the time. And it wouldn't be possible, without all of us kind of trying to put something together, which is really exciting and great to be a part of.
Well, yeah, that answers some of my questions and brings up more, of course. First of all, I had heard that Kansas City was becoming a kind of hotbed of the arts and artistic, progressive artistic movement. But this is beyond what I considered. I mean, Kansas City, of course, has a history of, in jazz, of being a place where lots of great musicians and great music came from. But so it seems that this scene is centered around a school that is teaching this kind of music and teaching progressive and avant-garde music. But yeah, and you're playing all the time. Who are the people that are coming to these shows?
That's a good question. Yeah, it's kind of a little bit all over the board, and that's it's interesting that I keep when in coming to shows, I mean, and when people are coming to shows and stuff, it's really interesting to me to see who is coming, because sometimes I don't see I see new people at shows, and which is really cool to see. Playing in other cities, sometimes it's the same people, or just the people who played the show that have come. It's like it's and here it's sometimes I'm really shocked to see, like, I've never met that person before, I've never seen that person before, oh, I've never seen them, oh, they've come a few times. It's kind of a little bit all over the place. So sometimes it's artists, sometimes it's other musicians and other scenes you're like, oh man, this stuff is happening here, I had no idea. Sometimes it's people who are just regular music fans of the scene, and they're like, oh, I've never seen this kind of thing happen here before, that's really awesome. And it depends on, like, if who we're playing with. If we're playing with, like, we've played a number of shows with rock bands, one of them being, there's a group here that's amazing, Jorge Arana Trio. Jorge Arana is an amazing guitar player here in town, and the trio, their trio is kind of this like very like math rock, like doom jazz kind of thing. That's really amazing, and they've been a staple of the Kansas City scene for like a decade or more. And like we've played shows with them, and it's really cool to see who they have like a following, and they have a big following in town, and like people come to see them, and they're like, oh, well, that's cool that you're like that we were on the bill with them, because we get to meet new people and expose people to what we do, and it's kind of fun to like play with those lineups and kind of try to get a different crowd out every time, depending on what you're doing, and if that works. Sometimes it's other fans of the music or other musicians, and sometimes it's artists in the general scene who are like visual artists or sculptors, painters, writers, and stuff like that, and dancers. We've done a lot of collaborations with in EMAS, the Extemporaneous Music and Art Society. We've done a number of dance collaboration elements, like doing improvised music and dance with other also elements of visual art and live video. So that's been fun. So bringing in kind of more elements of performance art into those scenes kind of brings people out who are like would not have seen this kind of music or this kind of art practice before. So
So what are we, I'm just curious, what are we talking about at these shows? I mean, are you getting 10 people, 20 people, 50, 100?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the most I've seen one year, like depending, I mean, the most I've seen at like an improvised music show per se is like 50 people in Kansas City, which is pretty, I mean, and that's happened a few times. Bass player, like we have a monthly series at an artist foundation here in town. I just finished my residency with them, Charlotte Street Foundation, and they do amazing work here, giving artist residencies and abilities to perform and like opportunities to show their work. And they just built a new facility where I had a studio at, and they have like a theater and gallery space all over. And we have a monthly series there, third Wednesday of the month. EMAS presents, and to end the year last year, the calendar year, we did. Jeff Harshbarger, who's a local bass player, he puts on a performance of John Zorn's Cobra every year. So he has to call it KC Renegade Cobra. That's like kind of the deal. If Zorn lets you perform Cobra, you have to like name it the city and Renegade because it's not the original people, who did it. But we had like 50 people at that show, which was amazing to see. And again, it was people from all over the scene and different art practices and just people from the general public. So usually consistently we have that's like the height of what I've seen. And then I've, usually between like sometimes 10 to 15, 20 people, sometimes as low as 5 or like 3 people, which is common. That's not like completely out of the realm of, that happens. It's, improvised music, experimental music. That's kind of like, you're like, yeah, probably 3 to 5 people usually. I've been really amazed and humbled that like a lot of people do come out to support music in Kansas City. Probably better compared to other cities that have a similar scene.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I moved to Nashville about 10 years ago now, and there's a guy down here, Chris Davis, who started putting on shows, avant-garde shows here. And I've watched that audience grow. It started with 2 or 3 people in the audience, and it's gotten up to as many as 20 and sometimes 30, and depending on, 40, depending on who he gets to play. I mean, we've, he's had people like Ian Riley come through, and Mary Halverson, and then of course more recently, people like the Aesthetics. I don't know if you know that band with Anthony Perogue. And
yeah.
So I mean, they would bring out 30, 40 people, to a small show. But it does seem. Have you seen the audience seem to grow a little bit in the time you've been doing it there? In general?
Yeah, I have. I think so. Yeah, I definitely have seen like a change over, and I think, well, and I think probably pre-COVID, it was still, it was probably maybe still like growing and probably would have been a little bit bigger, but then kind of, since COVID, like we didn't start playing shows again until, or I didn't start playing shows and I didn't start playing shows with other people until probably like June of last year. So about, the beginning of June, around this time last year, I started like playing out. I started playing out again, and I did notice that probably toward the beginning, like right before COVID started, we had a pretty good with some of the groups I was playing in. We had a pretty good turnout of people, like like 20, sometimes 25, 10 to 15 more on the end. And now with COVID, it's been since like we're still in COVID, of course, but like, how things have been opening up in the last year, I've definitely seen waves of stuff. Like at the beginning when shows were starting to happen again, we had a pretty good size audience, for stuff we were doing. And definitely if we were pairing up and doing some different stuff, like with different types of art practices or like other bands and stuff. But then I think with kind of the different variants and different waves, things have kind of have come back and then like completely fell back again. And like, it's kind of gone back and forth. And so I feel, like now it's like in this, we're in summer. I feel like it has gone, like, not that the interest has gone down. I think in some ways people are maybe still slightly hesitant of going out. Um, but every once in a while, we'll have, of course, like the shows with like five people, but then, we'll be like, oh, there's like 15, 20 people here, so it's kind of right now, at least in the last, like, I'd say like 6 months, it's been a little bit all over the place. And I can't necessarily completely track it. And even when I was on tour a couple times this year, outside of KC, like me and my friend Evan Verplu put out a record, and we went on a Midwest tour, and it was kind of all over the place. Like, depending on, we had good crowds, and then sometimes we had a few people, or no, like one show we had nobody, and we just played to each other, and that was totally perfectly fine. But like, it's just an interesting thing. It was just like, I don't know, I can't necessarily track it. It's kind of an interesting deal, with how, I think other people have talked about also that the audience has been in other places has been slow to grow again. But I think that might be true in some cases for sure. I think it's just been with how uneasy we all kind of feel, as we have been for the last 2 years. Not only with COVID and the general zeitgeist. It's been kind of, I feel that has some kind of like spilled over into people's like everyday lives or what they do in their free time, and I think people are still hesitant in some ways to go out and do and see stuff. But then again, like I said earlier, I'll be shocked and there'll be like 20, 25 people at a show, and then the next time we play, like a week or two later, it's like 2 people. So it's kind of all over
Yeah,
the
well,
place, it seems.
I mean, that makes sense, but it does sound like Kansas City is kind of a fertile place for this kind of music. Do you get touring acts coming through of that ilk? I mean, any avant players that come through? Are there like venues that book out of town people?
Yeah, I've been helping, like, for the last year, as people have been going back out and touring. I've been Me, Evan, and the whole EMAS crew and other people have been helping people book shows here. We've been lucky to have a lot of really awesome players come through in the last year. Like Damon Smith has come through a number of times. We're having him on the series, along with Weasel Walter, Alex Cunningham, and him, next month. But then we brought in, like, John Mueller, the percussionist. I don't know if you know his work. He's in Wisconsin. We had him come through in April. Man, we've had a pretty awesome list of people that have come through and contacted us in the last year. And places here are pretty open to booking this kind of music. We've been pretty lucky in that regard. There's a number of venues we usually play with. There's some that are new that we're always asking, and if it doesn't work out, we're always like, oh yeah, maybe we'll come back to them. But there's with everything that closed, a lot of it has started to come back again, which has been really exciting. It feels pretty, like, this place, Kansas City, feels pretty resilient towards, like, in that case, like, it's always just, it keeps pushing, and there's places to go and places to see, or places to play and places to try out and do new stuff. And yeah, we've been lucky to have venues that are just open to what we do. And it's kind of, there's a few places that we do a lot of stuff. Like I said, Charlotte Street has been great about letting us have our regular series there. And then a number of other places that have been open to having us and are always like, yeah, come back, this is great. We've never, we've had a couple places that have been like, yeah, we're not really into this. Like, maybe we'll, and that's totally valid. And, like, we understand it's kind of like, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but, like, just keep trying and see what we can do.
Cool. Yeah, well, that's great. So let's go back. How did you, you're obviously a schooled guitar player. I mean, you compose, so you write music. I assume you read music. What attracted you to the more avant end of the spectrum as opposed to jazz or rock or anything else like that?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Like, starting out playing guitar, I was definitely more like I started playing guitar when I was like 12. 11 or 12, and really into, you know, like classic rock guitar, as like a lot of, you know, kids that age are. When you're learning, you want to learn all the, like the classic songs, the famous riffs and all that stuff, you know. And I love that music still. But I think probably as I was starting to really play and practice more and do stuff, I was kind of like, man, I just kind of want to make, I wasn't really interested in like continuing to learn other people's songs. I was more interested in like either writing my own stuff or just like playing or playing and having like a unique style. And probably, I mean, probably like the biggest gateway to my interest in, you know, doing more like avant-garde guitar stuff was like, you know, Jimi Hendrix. The stuff I was really interested in with Jimi Hendrix was when he was making sounds that didn't sound like the guitar at all. You know, like, I think like definitely the biggest textbook example is like all of Electric Ladyland, and then of course like the Band of Gypsies record, where he's just like I think the coolest thing is like, you know, Machine Gun, where he is just like exploring like timbrally with effects, like what the guitar can do necessarily, you know, like taking it and expanding upon it. And I was always kind of more interested in those kind of things rather than like the other direction. I think that like, I mean, it is very cliched, but I think it's very, very true. Jimi Hendrix is kind of like the of that era of guitar players, is like you can kind of, it is a nexus point to like going in a various amounts of different directions of like, if you're interested in that, like where you go, you're either really into like the sounds he makes, you're either really into like the lead playing, which I am too, but you know, for not just that alone, but the other element, like overall elements, you know. You know, I mean, he definitely, you know, inspired like later guitar players of the next decade, but more on like the virtuosic, technical playing side rather than the sonic capabilities of the guitar, right? So like out of that you get like the late 70s, early 80s, like neoclassical movement, you know, like Eddie Van Halen and onward, like, you know, Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, Louis Malmsteen all say, you know, Hendrix is like their ultimate hero, you know. But you know, around that time, I think what gets ignored and historically, this music has been kind of understated in the general music culture and zeitgeist. Is like, you know, Derek Bailey has been, you know, doing a bunch of stuff with the guitar prior to that, and still around the same time. And I think like, you know, he also is like an innovator in that way of like taking what the guitar can do and expanding upon it. And I don't mean that in a way that it's like, you know, Jimi Hendrix, and I don't mean that in the sense that like, well, why aren't people listening to Derek Bailey? No. I just think that like, that's another person around that time that's doing that. And it's really exciting around that time, like what is happening with the instrument. And so,
well, why aren't people listening to Derek Bailey?
Well, I don't know. You know, that's really hard. I don't know. I don't necessarily believe there's a couple of things about that. I mean, this is more of like a general, like, if we wanted to dive into like a critique of like musical political economy or anything like that, you know, it's kind of an interesting thing. Yeah, like Hendrix, it is a strange thing that around that time that like Hendrix becomes so big as he is because of like, I think he's amazingly multifaceted, amazing songwriter, amazing guitar player, musician overall. But it's very interesting around that time, like what's happening in the interest of him. He was there kind of at the perfect moment, but also, you know, he wasn't necessarily the most as popular as we see him now until after his death. You know, like he.
And I was just kidding about Derek Bailey.
Sure,
I mean, we both know why. We both know why. I mean, people. I mean, to me, what's more interesting about Derek Bailey is how influential he has been. I mean, you know, what we're calling avant-guitar now, how avant-garde can it be if Derek Bailey and Fred Frith were doing it 50 and 60 years ago?
Exactly, yeah, because it's like, well, and that's the interesting thing about it is like, you know, with that is that, you know, people are still like, I mean, if you even look to like Schoenberg freaks people out, you know, necessarily like you listen to Schoenberg or something like that, and they're like, oh man, I remember sitting in theory classes in undergrad and, you know, like listening to Schoenberg string quartets and like, you know, going through and like, you know, in class studying like his 12-tone system and like how he's constructing that. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. But like people are still like, it's over 100 years old, you know, and like, you know, and even the Rite of Spring is over 100 years, almost 110 years old. And people are like, this is whack, but it's, you know, and this is weird and I don't know how to deal with it. But I I wonder if that has to do. I mean, there's a number of factors most likely, but yeah, it's kind of like because if you look at Coltrane in the the mid '60s, I mean, that's almost 60 years old, and people are still like, that's too weird, you know. And it's this thing. Is it a thing? The question to be asked is like, or questions to be asked. There's multiple questions. Is it a thing that it's because it didn't get a ton of exposure and wasn't just like anointed by like the zeitgeist of that musical genre or whatever, that it wasn't like signified as like valid, or was there such a split that it just, we're in the point of like a very like postmodern world where there's just so many avenues and the centrality of like a culture is gone. That, I mean, there's a whole that's a whole like discussion and thesis of, or like, you know, it could be someone's PhD dissertation, but you know, so it's an interesting deal regarding that, because I've always been interested in that, because I just think it's just sounds. There's nothing, you know, about it that's like completely out of the realm of imagination or like something that we can contain. But if you put it in a different context, it's interesting, because, you know, there's people who listen to movie soundtracks like it's pop music. You know, like people listen to Hans Zimmer soundtracks like they're pop music. I had, you know, friends who were like, oh man, that Batman's the Dark Knight Returns soundtrack is amazing. And I'm like, well, okay, how is that any different? Or like complete, like, how is that, like, you just listen to your, like, driving around listening to your car, you're listening to the Dark Knight soundtrack, it's just like low bass and boss. It's really cool. I don't, you know, dislike it, but I don't, you know, how that translates to why is this weird then? Why is, like, you know, this like Metal Machine music by Lou Reed, how is that weird compared to like all this other stuff? But and that's, you know, something I, as you know, kind of going back to your question, like I was kind of starting to get interested in just more like sound for the sake of itself, as I was like buying guitar pedals and all this other, and buying guitar pedals, kind of like getting into a variety of different kinds of music. I mean, you know, listening to like, you know, getting into, you know, classic rock and stuff like that, and then going in and you're starting to dive into like more of, you know, like more grunge music or punk music, or more, and that how the connection between that and like experimental music was really interesting to me. And just kind of diving into those records, like I like Sonic Youth, some of those early records.
Well, Sonic Youth, I would get, but what do you see as a connection between grunge and punk and experimental?
Well, especially like some of those bands were really into that kind of stuff, like it, you know, like more, you know, well, specifically like more like Sonic Youth and some of those eras were like, you know, but also, you know, like the SST label, you know, like Greg Ginn and all, you know, was really into help, like putting together, putting together projects, or having more experimental acts on his label. You know, like I know I talked to Elliot Sharp for a project that I was doing, and he was, you know, he released some of his you know, stuff more with like computer and guitar in the 80s on the SST label, and like that whole history is really interesting. I wasn't necessarily aware of that when I was like, you know, 16 or 17, but like, you know, you know, like Sonic Youth was really interested in that stuff. But then, like, you know, one of the big influences on me were two bands like Radiohead and Wilco, right? And so, you know, going through what inspired like Radiohead, you know, like Johnny Greenwood's really into Penderecki. They were really into like early Aphex Twin, and they were also listening to like Bitches Brew by Miles Davis. And then you go to Wilco, and they're like they're listening to, you know, like, well, you know, Nels Cline is definitely an influence, but you know, they're listening to like tape collage music, you know, and you can hear that on like Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, or you can hear their interest in like television, and like Derek, like, you know, Nels Cline and them are really into, and Jeff Tweedy are really into like avant-garde jazz, and kind of interested in utilizing those elements. And so those were kind of like the gateway drugs into me going in and finding more really, you know, more experimental, like, you know, weird music. And as I started taking like composition lessons, you know, I was still, you know, playing guitar, doing all this stuff, and I was like, well, I like playing guitar, I was just like, you know, putting together pedals and making sound. I was still working on like technique and practicing and all this stuff, and I was playing in like a one time or another I was playing a jazz band in high school, but then as I got to college, I was in like the college jazz band at the community college I was going to before I went to a conservatory, and then playing in a swing band and kind of interested in that and looking into that music. But then I was taking comp lessons, and I had with Michael Miller, who was my first teacher, and he was showing me all this stuff, like, going every week, and he was like, oh, here's Terry Riley, and I was like, oh my God, we're gonna listen to George Crumb, Black Angels, and then you're gonna dive into this stuff. And then he was also an improviser, and he was like, well, you should listen to this stuff, and like, here's electroacoustic music, and like, let's go dive into that. And then I just like started going down the rabbit hole, like, kind of doing all these different things, and finding, like, trying to find like where I most fit. And then starting to play, as I started in school, playing with the imp ensemble, and like really trying to think about like and playing with people, was like, well, what do I want to do with the guitar? How I wanted to start thinking of it differently, while simultaneously, I was learning composition. I was also really focused on electric guitar. I mean, electronic music, electroacoustic music, and writing pieces, for performers, or writing for just like solo electronic stuff, or just tape pieces, or like fixed media pieces, to composition. And then like all three of those different trajectories hadn't connected yet, and I probably in the last couple of years those things have started to meld. And and I'm just always constantly studying, trying to figure out, like listening to new things and finding new things to be into, to try to find.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, talking about electroacoustic, that's a great segue into the record, which is called For Electroacoustic Guitar. Is that the actual title?
Mm-hmm.
And on that record, each piece references one of your influences, or a composer, like Schoenberg, or Subotnick, or someone like Pauline Oliveros. So listening to the record, which I enjoyed, but what I'm hearing is, I mean, it all sounds kind of like you, and I'm wondering, are those individual pieces, what in each individual piece, or if anything, is influenced by the particular person it's named after, or was that just a name that you gave to the different pieces just to reference people who influenced you?
Yeah, it was just more like each track was to give a nod to someone I respect, or someone who influenced me, or a teacher that I had. Not necessarily any of the musical elements in there that was like a nod to them specifically. It just felt like I wanted to, like, dedicate a track to people who really matter, who really mattered to me as artistically, as a teacher, or just like as a fan of their music. None of the musical elements were necessarily like, oh yeah, this piece is for this person, I'm gonna just, that's that technique I'm using, or something like that. It was just more like, that's a nod to them, kind of like what I mean. And the album is definitely an exact like reference to like Braxton's For Alto, because that record definitely was a big influence on me. Hearing it when I was like 17 or 18. I had my uncle is a jazz fan and a music fan, and we always shared music back and forth, and he was like, oh yeah, so you're kind of getting into this stuff, check this out. And he sent me a copy of For Alto, and I was like, oh man, I didn't know how to comprehend it. I was just like, this is, I was like, it was kind of like a lot of information to pack in, but I kept going back to it, and it's always been like a record that I really love. But I loved how each piece was, it's about like the, and with this album, it was like, this album For Electroacoustic Guitar was like an exploration of like things I'm working on and trying to learn with the guitar, with computer processing. And this is like kind of like all of these techniques I've been like developing, or like sounds or ideas, into one thing, and still trying to build on it going forward. But this is kind of like the first document of that material, and it feels like a introduction into what I'm currently doing and will continue to do with that. And yeah, it was just more like I wanted to just give a nod to all of these people that I think have have really changed my perspective on music itself and my practice now. So,
right. And you say you built a new live processing rig for this project. So what is that rig? What are you using? what are you using plugins, using Macs? Are you developing your own Macs plugins, or are you using pre-programmed ones?
Yeah, so the whole rig itself is mostly in Ableton Live, and it's a lot with a lot of the Max for Live objects and Ableton objects in there. I have built a version, like a whole Max patch version, that's for like for sound spatialization and such. So the version that I'm using on the record is all in Ableton and using like Max for Live objects. And so I have guitar plugged into a DI into an interface with a controller. I'm using an Akai APC40, and basically, I actually can show you. I have it right here. Just to get a little visual representation. So I'm using this right here.
Okay.
And so all of these are different effects on here. So
On-off switches, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, all on-off switches. And so for different like processing, like this one's like delay, this one's different like phasers or flangers or different, different pitch shifters and stuff like that. And so all of them, a number of the effects are, depending on which ones I want to control and change, are hooked up to these knobs right here. So I'm kind of like turning those and pressing those and going on and off. But they're also hooked up to LFOs. And so instead of like having to change the rate, I have it somewhat automated on the LFO at this certain like there's certain like frequency to like kind of like oscillate and change at this point. And if as I move the knob, it changes the rate at which it's changing things. So I don't have to keep doing that every time if I want things to change. It's more automated / like gives more variety, but also like kind of like it's up to chance, like what could happen at times. And so basically using this as like a giant pedal board to trigger things on and off. And then the rig also, like depending on like the performance I have Max for Live, the surround panner set up. So like when I just did a performance with my my teacher, Dr. Jeff Kaiser, and I'm studying with him at the University of Central Missouri. And we just did a performance together where we, him on trumpet and electronics and myself on guitar and electronics with this rig, playing in like a quad setup. So we each have like quad panners sending our sound around the room, depending on like what, where we want to take it. But I've been also messing with that with like spatialization and elements of this new material and this new practice.
So I'm always interested to what there's obviously a lot of improvisation going on. And so, I mean, they're called compositions, but to what extent are they static, and to what extent are you improvising, and to what extent are the effects, composed as to where they're going to appear and not appear, and when you are improvising, are you reacting to the effects as well as just improvising freely? How does it all work together, the composition and the improvisation?
Yeah, so with the if I'm doing something that I think has like more of an identity as a composition, or I want to develop these ideas more, I'll kind of create like a score of some kind. So this piece that I worked on, two pieces, Chomsky Hash, I'm taking to ICMC, and then another piece, Corpus. Basically, I kind of like outlined a score, or at least like a time frame for myself. So, I did like, 8 minutes or so. And this is the elements of what I want to happen. This is scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, or whatever. And this is what I want. This is what sometimes what I'll do is I'll have like, oh, these are the effects I want at this point, and then I'm going to transition from this to this to this, and then we're going to move through that. In like Corpus, I utilized elements of like pre-recorded guitar pre-recorded guitar samples thrown into a granulator, and then I'm having those play like, like they're playing like MIDI playback of that material, but through the live processing of what I'm doing. So it takes a snippet, open like a window, a snippet of what I'm doing, and then it plays with that sound sample with the MIDI data in another of that pre-recorded track. And so that's an element of like something I can do. That's just going to be to like, okay, that is like 8 minutes long. So I'm going to try to, this piece is going to try to follow that trajectory. And this is going to be like, this is the elements that are like thought out and organized. And that's the element that I want to be more fixed, is, like that granulated element that I'm using, but it's also interacting and feeding with a live element of it. But I want that to be under one umbrella of this thing. Now, that's a lot of more of my like solo stuff, is a lot more like I'm trying to plan it out and do that. If I'm playing with other people, it's more up in the air about what could happen. I've used this rig on a couple records that haven't, one of them come out yet. No, on the duo record I did with Evan and I, Hunter, which came out earlier this year that we toured on. I use this rig, and that's just more like improvised. And so like I'm more just reacting on like what he's doing and trying to follow that as I want to go along. And it changes a little bit every time. And sometimes, depending on if I'm playing with more people, I don't want it to be overwhelming amount of sound, because I don't want to like obscure what other people are doing or just be so like loud or just, blend too much to, or if I'm doing solo stuff, it's just me. I just want it to be as like loud and as possible, or at least just like more, there's more, it's more dynamic or more, loud and a ton of elements of stuff. I want it to be a little bit more sparse if it's just with other people, just so I can switch through things, but I'm also an ensemble player, so I don't want to overpower other people. Now, if it's someone else with like electronics or something, like with Jeff Kaiser, it's just the two of us, it's a duo, so you can kind of and sometimes overpower each other or complement each other and still be like have that dynamic element. Not that you can't do that with bigger groups, but it just depends on the context,
A situation like that, are you ever not sure who's making the sound, whether it's him or you?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I find that to be fun. Like when we played, and we just put out a trio record with my friend, Kevin Cayley, who is in Ithaca. He came to Kansas City last year, and we did a trio record that came out on Mother Brain. There was a lot of that when we were in the studio. It was like, I didn't know what he was doing comparatively to what I was doing at times. And that was a lot of the fun of it, when going back and being like, oh man, this is like really blurring between like what's really happening. And that's fun. And also a challenge to try to continue to react in that situation.
Yeah, I've been in that situation. Yeah. It can be very disorienting. It's like all of a sudden you don't know, am I playing that? Is he playing that? And well, where do I go from here? But yeah, it is a lot of fun. It's really a lot of fun. I watched a video for Highways Jam with Broken Heroes, and that using a combination of laptop and pedals. And so what makes you choose the laptop over if the same effect that you could get like a delay or something in Ableton or something?
Yeah, that's a good question. It kind of just depends on the context, because with especially with like more like pedals I buy, they have kind of like an identity in themselves, and they do it like a thing, and I like this combination of stuff. With like Highways Jammed, it was kind of like, that was like an experiment to see like what could I do with all of these kind of elements. And instead of like direct in, I mic'd the guitar amp, and then just had that the pedal, the guitar with the pedals being processed in Ableton. So it was kind of like two levels of stuff, and seeing what I could do to really obscure the sound.
So were you running the mic from the amp into Ableton? Is that the way you
Hmm.
work the pedals? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I was kind of just seeing like what I could do with that. I did that on a like that project and another one where I was doing more prepared guitar and stuff, and seeing, doing not necessarily like traditional or like upright guitar playing or anything like that, but just trying to see like this is an element of just complete sound transformation and stuff like that. So I go back and forth depending on the context, like and like what's like kind of practical in situations, especially if I'm playing live, versus like recording at home or like recording in a studio. Um, Depending, like if I'm like on tour or something, I'm just going to take guitar amp and pedals. Um, it just, and depending on the people I'm playing with, I'm still developing this rig in the sense of like I feel like with the guitar pedals I have, am I playing with that and with the other people I play with and other, well, just in general people I play with, I feel more, I'm still in a space where I think those elements work together with that rather than getting the laptop out with that stuff. I think there's still, I feel like in specific contexts with improvisers, that stuff seems to work better for me, or at least I feel more comfortable using that as I'm still trying to learn and work out the process with like a laptop rig specifically. And in a live setting, like if I'm on tour, I just take, yeah, like I said, pedals, guitar, and pedals, borrow an amp, and go along with that. It seems easier to do if I'm doing, and depending on who I'm playing with, and if I'm doing it in a studio, and depending on the people I'm playing with, I'll bring both and see what we can get out of it, and see what like different places we can go. To me, it kind of depends on the people I'm playing with at times, and I kind of want to just be flexible in terms of the tools I have, and be able to bring myself to the context, and in a way that complements everybody and not overpowers or just like forces the issue of myself in it. Like there are times in playing where you're like, no, this is my idea, I'm going to do this. But if you're coming in the tool, like with the tools you have, I want to be able to be as flexible and complementary as possible playing with other people.
Yeah, well,
So
it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot involved in what you're talking about because, I mean, playing through a laptop, depending on what effects you're using, if you're playing that through a full range PA system, you're covering a frequency range that you're not covering with guitar. So that could, and especially a lot of the type effects you're using in the laptop can be very washy, and and could easily overpower their stuff. So it's interesting that it makes sense that you're using pedals and a guitar, because that does tend to focus the sound in a different way. So what guitars and pedals and amps are you using?
I have two guitars mainly. I have a Fender Jazzmaster that I have, and then a Fender Stratocaster. Guitar amp wise, I use like a solid state frontman 212R. Just one of those. I have a little orange amp too that I use depending on the space. Like I have this giant amp versus like this little orange mini amp that I like. If it depending on the space I use those in. So I kind of go back and forth between those two. Guitar pedal wise, I have a lot of electro harmonics pedals. Like I have like the Electric Mistress, like the Memory Boy, Memory Man, Analog Delay. I have the Pitchfork which I really love. I have the older one. I know the new one has a lot of really cool elements that I might actually like go back and buy. And I really like that, especially with an expression pedal over the whammy, because that's kind of like was their answer to the whammy. I use a fuzz face for distortion. Crybaby wah. There's this pedal I use called the Skitter from Champion Lessie. They're kind of a smaller
Yeah, I never heard
pedal.
of it.
They're really great. They do like little batches of pedals. My friend Aaron Osborne, he plays. I mentioned him earlier. He plays with us in EMAS. He is a big pedal head, big gear head, and is always telling me about stuff. And a lot of the pedals I have, I bought from him at one time or another. He's like, "You should try this. This will be great with your sound." So the Skitter is like a reverb tremolo pedal that's really fun, and it's an amazing tremolo pedal that gets into some weird stuff, and that's a lot of fun. And they make a batch of those every once in a while. They do like 50 at a time every few months, and I bought one off of Reverb, and he was like, yeah, buy it now, it'll just go up in price. Let's see, Memory Boy. I have a couple like grain delay based pedals that I use.
Which one?
I have the Red Panda Particle. It's really awesome. And then I have this one from Norway that Aaron bought, had it custom made from Plasdac Electronics or something like that. And it's a grain delay pedal, and he had it programmed custom to himself, so it has like the different kind of combinations you can have, and it has like a reverb element, and then also like very pointillistic like grain like sounds. So if I put those two together with the Red Panda and that, I can get some really cool just like pointillistic guitar stuff that's really fun to play with. And then I'm trying to think if I forgot anything. Yeah, that's like those are my main pedals. I have a pretty sparse pedal collection. Like everything I have on there I use. Like I don't have like extra pedals a lot of the time, because I don't know if it's a thing where it's like I just am kind of like utilitarian and economical in what I have. I was like, I like these things, and maybe as I had like a crew more, I'll start trading. But I'm kind of like, this is my stuff. I don't necessarily want to get rid of it or take it off. This is the sound that I have. But yeah, that's kind of the main rig I have for that, for like just guitar amp, like guitar pedals and stuff.
Yeah, there's kind of two schools with that. One is you just stick to certain pedals and you learn them inside out and you learn everything they can do. And then there's the school of, I'm just going to throw something new on here just to mess myself up and inspire a different direction for tonight. And they're both valid, and they're both ways you can go. How do you decide whether you want to lay the guitar down a la Frith or Keith Rowe, or strap it on and play it upright? What makes you decide to do one or the other? Or is it just experimenting on any given night?
A lot of the times, like with other people, I haven't really done like prepared guitar or like on my lap guitar or anything like that. That's a lot of that stuff has been more solo stuff that I like solo recording stuff. I haven't really done a lot of performing that way. Maybe it's a thing where it's like, to me, that was trying to just experiment and see what I could do with it. And maybe I'll go and do a solo set of that stuff. And a lot of that stuff specifically was made like I did another record called The Gods Hate Kansas, where it was like EBO with effects and then like processed through a bunch of Ableton stuff from the guitar amp. And that was fun to try to see like what I could do with that, with the EBO, just that as being like a main sound, the beginning of like a sound maker, and then on the floor making, or on my lap or on the table playing with stuff with different objects. And then Highways Jammed was kind of came after that, where I was doing like more objects, see if I can get more of like a sparser, starting from a sparser place to like more noise and like cloud like elements, and like really explore the guitar even more. A little like drier sound, like a little bit more drier, more pointillistic stuff, rather than just like a big wall of sound. But I never really got a chance, or haven't gotten the chance, maybe I will, to do that stuff live in a live setting, only on that video that I have of the performance of Highways Jammed, where that was Charlotte Street gave us the opportunity. Every year they do a thing called Open Studios, where they open Charlotte Street up to the public, and they have performances all day, and people and artists can show their studios and all this other stuff. But because of COVID, what they did instead was they had us they had things like, it was for more like documentation, like we're going to record this, we'll stream it live, and you'll have the video, you can share it around and stuff. And that was like, okay, cool, I want to try to do something new. This is what I've been doing during COVID for like 6 months, and really exploring this. That was a lot of fun. But yeah, that's technically the only live performance form of that was done in one take. It wasn't like multiple, just did one performance done. And that's the only real performance of that kind of stuff I've done. I'd like to, in the future, if it was opportunity to do a solo set or something, I would totally do that. But I also feel like I did those things to build up to what I'm doing now. And I feel like that's more of my focus, of like, for it with electronic elements is doing like the stuff I did for electroacoustic guitar is like those things built up to that, and that's kind of my focus now. And maybe eventually I'll go back and do more of prepared tabletop stuff. But for now, I'm more focused on upright playing with electronics.
Well, speaking of playing during COVID and videotape stuff, that Will Yeager thing you did on Zoom, were you guys in the same room when you were improvising?
No, that was in our respective locations at the time. At the time, I know he was in Will was in Iowa City. He was finishing up his doctorate in bass performance there, and I was in Kansas City in my apartment.
And I guess for that kind of improvisation, latency isn't as big an issue because you're not playing to a groove or anything like that. You're just kind of responding. So if it's a couple of milliseconds or, even 15, 20, 30 milliseconds later, I guess it doesn't matter. Did you experience any weirdness in doing it like that?
Yeah, not like with other people. What we did with my friend Michael Eaton, we had like a quartet that met like once a month before we did a run of shows in New York. I was up there in May with Kevin Cayley, and I went from like Ithaca down into the city, and then we played with Michael Eaton, Cheryl Pyle, who's a flautist, and then Kyle Quas, who's a trumpet player from Bloomington. And Cheryl, Michael, Kyle, and I would get together monthly and just improvise on Zoom. And it was we definitely had some problems regarding latency or like even just like bandwidth, internet bandwidth. So every once in a while there was always something like, oh, someone's frozen, like on screen, and we can't hear their sound, and the three of us are playing or two of us are playing, and it's like, oh, I'll just keep going, just trying to see. Or it was like, issues of volume or issues of just anything around the gamut, I imagine, is everyone has. They're trying to figure out Zoom, but it was interesting in regards of just like as a way to practice with people and try to engage with folks outside of where you're at, but also a good challenge in terms of like how to react in different situations. I think it made things a little. I don't know. I felt like when we had all played together on Zoom and kind of worked out the kinks and knew how each other had played and were aware of the fact that something might crash on the internet. When we all played live, it was super tight. It was like we were able to respond to each other immediately, and it was just like, oh wait, we're all live now. There's nothing that's going to stop us from there's nothing in the interwebs that's going to stop this from happening, or unless there's someone's gear.
Your amp loads a fuse or something.
Yeah. So it was interesting in that regard and then Michael and Eaton and I got together weekly, and I think, we had to deal with those issues of just basic what's going on with the internet, latency and all that. But again, I felt like we got really tight when we would play in person. Like it just got the playing, because we had just spent the time meeting weekly, and it was something to look forward to during COVID, and I think the playing just got tighter. And I don't know if that's everyone's experience. I know I know a lot with that lot of stuff. A lot of people had like fatigue, like Zoom fatigue after a while. Like there was a lot of Zoom concerts, stuff like that. But I felt like it made me a more patient and more able to react to various situations.
Cool. Yeah. So there seems like you could go in a lot of directions in your future. I mean, you're going to get your master's. Is that a prelude to being able to teach? Maybe moving from your library job into a teaching job as a way of supporting your habit, as it were, what? And are you planning to stay wide and keep composing and playing live and doing all sorts of different stuff, or are you moving towards a point of something that you want to do with your music?
Yeah, it's a great question. So yeah, I'm coming into my last year, so I'll be done in the spring of 2023. If things go to plan. So yeah, I mean, in some cases, I could definitely teach. Probably a lot on the collegiate level, like especially in composition and a lot of other departments, you have to have a doctorate or a PhD or a DMA to teach, like, or if you want tenure or something like that. Now, with a master's, I could definitely, depending on the program, if it's, with the emphasis on music tech as the degree, it's, I could teach somewhat on the collegiate level with a master's, like I could adjunct or something like that, which I would totally be down to teach, or I would be definitely interested in teaching privately, or teaching, guitar privately, or teaching music technology based stuff privately, or composition as well. I definitely think, if I definitely love working at the library. I working as a public librarian is I'm very passionate about public libraries, or like, the freedom of information in that way. I think they're a big staple of our society in terms of the free flow of access of information and such. And so I'm only part-time, but I've always liked libraries have always been a place, and have definitely helped me in the development of my artistic life. And my general interest in music and the world as it is. My mom's is a public librarian. She works in the same system as me, but she works as a program planner for the head of the library system. And it's always been something. And my parents are both journalists, and so freedom of speech, freedom of information, freedom of access, free flow of access of information has always been something that's really important to me. But so yeah, I mean, if I continue to work at the library, that's great too, and just have a day gig playing and being really busy and is something I really thrive off of, and doing a lot of different stuff. And definitely, yeah, I feel like I'm definitely in the vein of my artistic life is very much as a performer, composer, a performer within that being like improviser, or like in somewhat interpreter of stuff. So I feel like those things feed each other. For me, it's like my guitar playing, my composition, and my interest in like electroacoustic music feed each other to me, and they all, like, I can't do one without the other. Like even when they're not related, like I'm still composing and working on projects for groups I'm in, or for people, for friends, or different ensembles. And that's something I took a break on for a while, because I got I did a lot of things at once and was kind of overwhelmed, and was like, all right, I didn't have anything on the horizon, so I took a break. But now I'm like really getting back into composing. And then the guitar and being a guitarist and like an improviser is central to me, and I think I will definitely always be doing that, and along with this. And I think they feed each other, and it's very, like, for me, it's a very organic, like flowing relationship between those elements that I have to do. I'm compelled to do this no matter how it happens. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's a thing where it's like it's like I have to do this to like live as a person, like just in like whatever capacity. It's like I'm driven, however insane that might sound, to just do it no matter what, So.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're not in it for the big bucks. We know that at this point. I mean, so that's all. Anybody who does any kind of art, seriously, you do it because you have to, not because you want to. And I'll be looking forward to seeing wherever it takes you. It should be really interesting. So let's stay in touch, and yeah, just keep me posted on whatever you're recording, or where you're playing, or all that stuff.
Will do. And thanks for talking with me. This is great.
Oh yeah, great talking to you, and hope it spreads the word.
Yeah, no, yeah, I hope so too. And yeah, this is great. I always enjoy talking about this stuff, and it was good to meet you finally.
You too.
Online even, so.
And congratulations again on your wedding, and have a great time in Ireland.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care, Seth.
Take care, Michael.